Hello everyone and welcome to OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. It's Joe here and today we're looking at a Bronzong deck based off of Ben Moskow's top 8 list from US Nationals. I'm sure a lot of you tuned into the stream for those who weren't actually participating in the event, but there's plenty that we can learn from the tournament, including none the least the Warlord deck that ended up in the finals of the Masters. That's a deck that Jack will be profiling in the near future, most likely later on in the week, so stay tuned for that. Today we're going to be looking at a Bronzong list. Like I say, there's a couple of changes to Ben Moskow's list. These are based off of personal preference, as well as stuff that we sort of learned across the tournament over US Nationals. I've made a few tech changes in here. His list can be found, along with all the other top 8 players, on the official Pokemon website. So if you just want to look at his list, the official website has the card for card list. In here, I think I've made 7 changes, and I'll go over those momentarily. First of all, let's talk about why Metal has been doing well. It ended up with 8 Metal decks in the top 32 of US Masters. 2 of the variants used Klinklang. 2 of the variants was much like this, a Bronzong sort of boxy style deck with lots of different tech attackers, and also there was a combination of Mega Rayquaza and Metal. Like I say, today we're looking at the boxy build. I'll be looking into the Metal Ray build as well, seeing as though 4 of those decks made the top 32, the highest amount of the Metal variants, and also one of them made Top Cut as well. So first of all, I'll go through the changes that I made. I ended up adding 2 fan clubs into Ben's list. This is to help us out in the Trainer Lock matchup, seeing as though Toad is pretty much back in full force now that Jason Klaczynski has led the way in how to play that deck. In the place of these 2 fan clubs, I ended up cutting a Bronzor. I believe a 3-3 count of Bronzong is enough. Ben opting to play 4, but I'm happy at 3-3. Also, I ended up cutting a 3rd Muscle Band that Ben chose to play. I feel Muscle Band isn't entirely necessary at 3, and I feel like the fan club overall is going to give us more consistent starts and help out in the long run. I also did a quick little personal preference alteration, playing 1 switch instead of an escape rope. It's a pretty easy inclusion to make, and it's just again based on personal preference. We have 4 VS Seeker and 2 Lysander. There's plenty of options for us to move attackers around, so I think a switch is overall more helpful to us. Additionally, Ben decided to play a Max Potion in his list. I've actually gone for an AZ in here. It's just so much more useful in the Trainer Lock matchup. And for the majority of matchups which actually can use their trainers, they're most likely getting knockouts regardless. So I feel like Max Potion wasn't too crucial in the list. Whereas AZ can help us out very, very crucially against Trainer Locking matchups, where they're not hitting us for one-shots, and sometimes they're going to be using stall tactics by capturing up hefty retreating Pokemon. We play quite a few in here, and definitely when we have our trainers offline and we can't use stuff like Floatstone and Switch, AZ is going to be a very useful card for us, so that's why I've included one of those. Another sort of quality of life change I've made is the A-Spec. I've actually gone for Dowsing Machine in here. Seeing as though we have a few techie supporters, it can sometimes act as a VS Seeker, like a 5th one for us, which is actually amazing. And also in general, we're a fairly slow list, and we can pretty much rely on Dowsing Machine to help us in the late game, rather than having early game comp searches. So I prefer Dowsing in here. The final switch I made, Ben played 2 Colress, which is definitely a strong choice with the amount of Rayquaza and Raichu around, utilising Skyfield so that we can get big Colresses. However, with the Dowsing and the full VS Seeker, I feel like 1 is okay, and I decided to add a single Zerosic. This is clearly to help out against Seismitoad. Getting rid of special energies off of them can be very useful for buying us turns of trainers. Also, we can get rid of stuff like Headringer if we're against, again, Seismitoad decks. If they get on something like a Keldeo, it can be very awful for us. So moving that is pretty useful. Also, Manectric likes to throw in a few Flare Tools, and that's a pretty popular deck right now also. Zerosic can also be used to get tools off of Garbodor, allowing us our Metal Links again, and also putting Aegislash back online. It also gives us Rush In, So this deck is very focused around having its abilities. So Xerosic is very, very helpful as just a single card in here. The final change I made, I took out a Mewtwo simply to throw in one Bunnelby. And this is purely out of fear of Wailord. As soon as we were seeing Wailord run through 4-0, 5-0, 6-0 on the day at Nationals, I remember Puka tweeting out a thing like, "What is happening? Wailord is undefeated right now." I started to see Verbank blowing up with lots of memes, as you can imagine, but also a lot of people hailing the Bunnelby as the thing that can topple Wailord. And essentially, it's pretty bang on the money. We're going to... Excuse me, I still have my cold. We're going to try and use Rototilla against the Wailord decks to mill them before they can mill us. And Wailord really has nothing for Bunnelby, at least not yet. It would be hilarious to see Wailord adapt to try and handle Bunnelby. But essentially, having one Bunnelby in a deck that can't handle Wailord in any other circumstance can pretty much just win you that matchup. This is obviously a card that you can take out if you're not in fear of Wailord. But on PTCGO right now, if you've been on it in the last few days, you'll know everyone is collecting their Wailords and trying to make that deck as quickly as possible. So I've thrown it in here for now. It's something to bear in mind that you can always tech one Bunnelby if you're in fear of Wailord. Some decks probably don't need it. Like if you're playing Groudon, there's no need to throw Bunnelby in because Groudon already has a very strong matchup. However, in a deck like this, where we probably would struggle against Wailord without a Bunnelby, we can turn that matchup into an auto win. Like I say, I took out a Mewtwo. It is a useful attacker in the deck for being something that we can just drop down with a couple of Bronzong attachments for big damage. However, in terms of specific matchups, I don't think Mewtwo is overly essential. So let's look at the deck list on the whole now. As you can see, we're playing the 3-3 Bronzong, and essentially the whole list is based around this Metal Link's ability, allowing us once per turn to attach a metal from the discard pile to one of our benched Pokemon. This allows us, of course, energy acceleration to help build up these sort of bigger attackers that we see normally not seeing much play because they're too expensive, but Bronzong makes it a lot easier for us to recycle these energy and make it all possible for us. The 2-of attacker that we're playing in the deck is Aegislash EX. Being a sort of boxy build, we have no more than 2 of this card because it serves its purpose just as a 2-of. It's disruptive enough in itself, having that Mighty Shield ability, preventing all damage done by anything with special energy attached to it. Seismitoad is one of the bigger decks right now that we have to face, and that often utilises double colourless to start using Quaking Punch on turn 1. This means that Aegislash will not receive any damage from those attacks, which is obviously very useful to us. Also, Raichu's a big attacker, hitting for usually huge numbers, and being able to stop them again utilising double colourless is going to be very helpful. Slowing them down for a turn or two, and also gives us the option to just Lysander up anything that has a single energy on it before Raichu can actually attack us. And it really helps out in those sorts of matchups. Even decks like Landorus and Donphan that play a combination of basic and special energy, it really limits their output, and Strong Energy is one of these cards that they love to play down on their dudes. Otherwise their numbers aren't as magic as they used to be, so Aegislash, with that Mighty Shield, very, very good card. Its attack isn't half shabby either. We have Slash Blast doing 40, plus 20 more for each metal attached to ourselves. That means that with a full complement of metal energy, we're hitting 100 and two-shotting pretty much all EXs. That can increase as we go along by throwing more metals onto him. We can also put Muscle Band on if we need to two-shot into Megas. But for the most part, we're not really looking for one-hit KOs in this deck with Aegislash. He's just a wall to get around things and poke for decent damage across the board. The other attacker that we have 2 of in the deck is Seismitoad EX. We have Quaking Punch, denying items. This is usually used in a defensive position so that we can set up our own board and slow down our opponent, so that we don't have to get hit with stuff like Rayquaza turn 1. It's also very good against other Seismitoad players because we're stopping them from using stuff like Headringer. It can also stop any hammers that they would like to play, and basically stopping their development on the whole, making it difficult for them to find their own double colourless energies and stuff like that. It can be really good for us. So Quaking Punch very, very useful in this deck. So let's get on to some other one-of cards. We have one Keldeo EX. This is a very important supporting card in the deck. Rush in, allowing it to jump into the active position with the ability. And if we have a Float Stone, it means that we can move between all of our attackers on our board. It's also really important to note that we have cards like Dialga, which you've seen just in the corner here, that ends up discarding its own energy via some of its attacks. And if we wish to attack with Dialga again, we can use a Rush In, so the Dialga is placed back to the bench, Bronzong can use Metal Links, and once again the Dialga is able to attack. So Keldeo, very useful for moving between our attackers. It can throw up stuff like Aegislash if we don't want to attack for the turn, but we just need to stall. And that's often a strategy we can do in the early turns. And like I say, seeing as though we have so many different attackers for different situations, it's useful to have Keldeo to freely move between them. Next up, I did just mention him, we have the Dialga EX. It's probably a bulkier EX that we have in the deck with 180 HP. Has two very useful attacks, the Chrono Wind doing 60 damage, and the defending Pokemon, if it's an EX, can't attack. This is pretty useful against stuff like Landorus. It can also be good against Seismitoad decks if they're not playing Energy Denial. It's actually quite an easy attack for us to get set up. And it forces them to have something like a Super Scoop Up or a switching card, maybe even a Float Stone, or like an AZ even. That can be really, really helpful for making them just getting to awkward situations if they want to attack us again with Quaking Punch. It can also be very good against Groudon EX, I've found, because once they pretty much come out, they're pretty much stuck where they are, and the wind can pretty much stop them in their tracks. We also have the Full Metal Impact, probably our hardest hitting Pokemon that we have in the deck, just a one-of. We have 150 damage, and discarding 2 Metal Energy attached to him. We can slap a Muscle Band on so that we can hit into all 170 HP X's, which is very, very useful. Also, the 150 is just a good number for killing cards like Empoleon, which has been popping up here and there in Archie-style decks. We also have one Cobalion EX, serving 2 very useful purposes. Again, the Righteous Edge is another card that we have to try and defend against Seismitoad. Discarding a special energy attached to Toads is very, very useful to us, because again, they're put into a situation where they need to start searching again, digging through their own deck, trying to get through their own resources to find more double colourless energies. And using Righteous Edge 2 or 3 times in a game can pretty much seal it up for us if we have that luxury. We also have Steel Bullet. This can help us, seeing as though it gets through weakness, resistance, and all other effects. It's actually a decent card at killing Raichu, because Raichu has resistance. So sometimes stuff like Aegislash needs a 4th energy, which is kind of awkward for us, so Cobalion's slightly better in that situation. For the most part, it's helping us get through safeguard Pokemon, such as Sigilyph and Suicune. Next up we have Heatran with the Steel Drop attack, doing 40 plus 40 more if there's a Stadium in play. Most decks right now are playing at least 3 copies of Stadiums, so a lot of the time this is going to be a useful strategy to us. We also have the Steam Blast attack doing 130. This is fantastic for hitting into Shaymin. Mew as well is very disrupted by this. And as a non-EX Pokemon, having 130 HP makes it a very good card to have on our side against decks like Landorus and Lucario, where they struggle to hit that sort of output in a single hit for just 1 prize. So we can force them to attack twice to just to take a single prize, and it can really slow them down. Finally, we have Kecleon, and this is a very techy and interesting card to throw in your deck. Kecleon has the colour change ability, turning it into the type of the defending Pokemon. This is rarely a notable factor, but it's actually useful at hitting into Mewtwo's for weakness. And his main attack is called Im-Attack, and you get to choose one of the defending Pokemon's attacks and use it as our own. This is why it's in the deck, basically. It's used against Raichu and Mega Rayquaza. Because they have Skyfield, we can allow them to keep that into play. Simply bench 8 cards on our own side of the board, seeing as though we play a lot of basics. I believe we play 14 in our deck. We have many options to fill our own bench, and then we can drop a Kecleon, use Im-Attack, and actually copy either the Raichu or the Rayquaza's attack to knock out whatever's in front of us. And we just give up a single prize, so it can be very disruptive against the Rayquaza deck for making the prize trade very awkward for them. The last Pokemon we play is just the Shaman EX. We have double colourless energy, we have Bronzong to use Sky Return if we really need to pick it back up, maybe to deny prizes if we have the chance. Going into an Aegislash is sometimes an option for us. But again, it's all about the setup ability for helping us draw more cards. Onto the trainers now. I've gone over the dowsing machine. We have 2 battle compressors in here. It's a very clutch card in our deck. It can get metals in the discard pile for Bronzong. It can get text that we don't necessarily need in the matchup into the discard pile. For example, Bunnelby is probably going to be one of these cards that always gets dumped with battle compressor until we hit that Werelord matchup where it becomes the king card in our deck. Also, it can get supporters in the discard pile for us if we happen to be holding a VS Seeker. It's something I often like to combo with Fan Club, seeing as though it's one of our best supporters on our first turn. Next up we have one switch. It's pretty useful to not simply rely on Keldeo, so having the extra switch is just a good option to have in here. We've maxed out the Ultra Ball and the VS Seeker just for maximum consistency. The deck, as you can see, plays 17 Pokemon, and it's pretty much all based on our Pokemon, how we get our strategy off, so having maximum amount of search cards is very useful. It can also get rid of Metal Energy, can help us lower the hand size for Shaman. Plenty of reasons why this is a useful card in here. We have the AZ. I've mentioned why this is very helpful against Trainer Lock, but also it's great for healing as well. Seeing as though we discard all the cards, we can reattach whatever Metal Energy is discarded from our Pokemon and distribute it however we want to. We have the Colrus. Again, it's a powerful draw supporter for us. We have 2 Lysander for picking off whatever we can't or whatever we want to. 3 N in here. Seeing as though we're not the quickest of decks in terms of attackers, although Seismitoad and I guess Cobalion can hit on the first turn, we're not really taking knockouts for 1 or 2 turns at least, so developing the ends is very nice for keeping us in the game, disrupting our opponent, and also we're going to be getting good amount of hand sizes off of them for a good few turns. We have the 2 Fan Club. It's probably, like I say, one of the best cards we have in the opening turns. The 4 Sycamore as well, just the most powerful draw trainer we have right now, and the 1 Xerosic I've already gone over. The stadium we choose to play is just 2 Steel Shelter. Status conditions aren't too large right now. However, we have both Keldeo to rush in and retreat, and also Steel Shelter to cover our status on all of our metal types. Useful for just bouncing other people's stadiums more than anything else, but it's a good card to have in the deck in case we come up against stuff like lasers. When people are unable to attack into Aegislash, if they're like a Seismitoad player, it's going to be a few turns until they actually find 2 regular energies and have the chance to attach them to a Seismitoad. So they're probably going to be in a position where they need to use lasers, and Steel Shelter can get around that very nicely for us. We have the 2 Floatstone. Everything is pretty much chunky in this deck. Only a couple of 1 retreat Pokemon with the Bronzors, the Shaman, the Kecleon and the Bunnelby. But for the most part, finding a Floatstone Keldeo combo is going to be very helpful to us. 2 Muscle Band. It's useful in a couple of situations. Like I say, it can help Dialga get 1 hits. It can help Seismitoad 2 hit onto the Landorus's or anything else weak to water. So it's a pretty good card to have in here. Finally, we have 11 energy. We've maxed out the DCE. It's useful on a bunch of things. The Shaman, the Aegislash can benefit from it. Toad, of course, Heatran and Dialga all love having double colourless, so it's a pretty useful card to have. And finally, the recyclable metals that we have in the deck as well. So that is the list. As you can hear in my voice, I'm pretty much dying right now, so I don't think I'm going to be able to get a video out with the battles today. However, stay tuned. I will get one up on the channel later on in the week. So, I've been Joe from OmniPoke, guys. I hope you enjoyed my deck analysis based off of Ben Moskow's list. However, I've made a few changes to try and deal with big threats in the format right now, and have slightly better matchup against Seismitoad, and also have the Tech Bunnelby as well for Werelord, seeing as though those are 2 decks probably we're going to be seeing a lot of in the near future.